I work in civil service learning, and I've been working on the competency framework now for a year and a half. My colleagues are going to introduce themselves next.
My name is Richard Lawrence. I'm a manager at Neath Job Centre.
I'm Ian Oldfield. I'm from the Home Office and we were an early adopter of it. I worked on performance management policy, so I've got some experience from just the first few months of introducing it.
Before I tell you a bit more about the session that I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes, we'd had planned to get to know you a little bit, which is quite difficult in the dark. So we'll try it anyway. I'd just like a show of hands from those of you who've been a civil servant for 5 years or more. Thank you, colleagues. 10 years, 15, 20, 25, more than 30 years. Hang on.
Rich, can you do that?
More than 35 years. Who have we got still standing?
It's a lady at the back.
Anybody more than 40 years? Anybody? That gentleman there.
Oh.
Packet of jelly babies. I know you deserve a lot more than that, but I'm afraid that's all there is. Please pass that back to that gentleman. I didn't miss anybody else with over 40 years, did I? Did I?
That just feels like 40 years.
I know what you're saying. So, what we're doing here for the next 45 minutes is talking about the Civil Service Competency Framework. One competency framework for all 420,000 civil servants. One set of standards, one set of behaviours clearly described. It's a key action in the Civil Service Reform Plan was to roll out one framework across government from April this year. It ties in with the reform themes of a smaller, unified civil service. There's quite an echo on my voice. Sound colleagues, if perhaps I need to move to a different spot. So, one competency framework was intended to do three key things. Support performance management. Many of you will have taken the new performance management framework from either April last or from April this year. To bring consistency to recruitment. As one competency language for recruitment, opening up vacancies to more civil servants, enabling mobility across government. And the third thing was to support development, to help with development planning. We're going to talk about each of those three areas in a bit more detail. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, although I recognise it's quite difficult in this big forum, but myself, Ian and Richard will be around at the end of the session if you want to ask us things individually. Right, we're going to start with talking about performance management and using the Civil Service Competency Framework for performance management. There are two key features about performance management that are common whichever government department you work in. And these two things are the new performance management arrangements clearly state that performance should be measured 50% what we do and 50% how we do it. And it's that 50% how that we're articulating in the framework. Another feature that's common across government is there will be some form of guided distribution for performance marks at the end of the year. Now underneath those two key things there is variety of how departments have described the marks, the forms that they use, but those two things are common wherever you go. And I've certainly looked at all of the big departments' forms, and they all have a column for the how. Well, let's look at how that works in reality. So I'm going to turn to Richard Lawrence from Neath Job Centre to ask him about his performance management objectives for this year. First of all, Richard, can you tell us a little bit about your job?
Well, I'm a manager of a local job centre. We've got approximately 40 to 50 staff within the command. My main role is to help people into employment. Within that we include delivering training sessions, sourcing training for people. So we are the front-facing face of the department. We also deal with a lot of people with health problems, sick and disabled, and we are supporting them to get the right benefits, but also supporting them to get on with their lives.
That's great. I think we can all clearly understand what Richard's job is about. Many of you, there are many colleagues from DWP in the room and who have good knowledge of that job. So Richard, what are the really important behaviours for that role?
Well, for me, the one I've picked out is delivering at pace, particularly this year. It is one of the newer competencies, but what I am finding is I do need to have more regular reviews, more people taking ownership of what they're doing. So that's one of the key things that we're looking at.
So delivering at pace. Any other competencies that you think are obviously essential for Richard's role, audience? Anybody like to shout anything out? The lights have gone on. Building capability for all, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more. Leading and communicating, thank you. So it's pretty obvious, it's pretty easy to identify which competencies are essential for your job. And a key point to mention here is that nobody is expected to demonstrate all 10 competencies in their job roles. The idea is that you select between 4 and 6 as being essential. Let's take that down to a next level of detail. If we just think about the competency building capability for all, Richard, of the indicators underneath that for your level, which jumps out at you as being really critical in terms of how you do your job this year?
I think it is communicating with the staff. There's so many new things coming on with us. It's having personal ownership of the training sessions, of delivering the training, and making sure that people actually understand what's being delivered.
Thank you very much. I'm finding the sound quite distracting. How is it for the audience? You're all fine? Good, I'll stop worrying about it then. Now, we've just heard an example there of how Richard is using the framework to describe the how of his job against his objectives, against the what. So again, I'd like a show of hands. How many people have agreed their objectives for this year already? They've completed their performance agreement. Hands up. Quite a number have, but still quite a lot left to do it. And of those of you with your hands up, hello colleagues at the top there. I hadn't seen you until this moment. Welcome everybody. For those of you with your hands up, who has got the framework and the indicators and the competencies clearly described in the how? Hands up. Some, but not as many. So the first thing to think about, the first thing I want to ask you to think about and go away and do when you get back to your offices is, when you agree your objectives, you must have in the how something from the competency framework. Yes, you can tailor that how to your context, and there may be that you add information about departmental values that are important, departmental standards of behaviour. But the framework must be referenced in there. Without that, without it actually being brought to life for people's performance reports, for people's performance conversations, we will not achieve the behaviour change we're trying to achieve. We will not achieve the consistency of standards, and nor will we drive up standards as intended. So that's performance management, the first area that we're going to talk about. I'd like to move, we've heard an individual story. I'd now like to go to Ian from the Home Office. Apologies, we're sticking with performance management. Ian, tell us how the Home Office introduced the framework particularly into the performance management area. How did that happen?
Okay, so the framework, we felt that the key with all new guidance is to get clear messaging. Because when something's new, there tends to be some concern about the gap with the unknown. So what we talked about clear messaging to make sure throughout the organisation we had messages through the intranet, through senior leadership, from line managers, right through giving consistent messages so that people could understand how to use it. In terms of actually what we used to use that, we found there's a lot of good central civil service learning products that helped us. We were able to do a lot of the learning using those products. Where we did a little bit more perhaps, occasionally we would have line managers looking for examples and things, at which point as a central policy team we took a stance of the line managers really knew the jobs best. So once we give them the training on how to use the competencies in terms of tailoring to their own role, that was really for them to do, and we would train our sort of local HR support to give line managers any further help in developing specific examples.
Thank you, Ian. Just slow down a bit next time you do answer your question. I was at Olympia yesterday, and after my session on the competency framework, which was to a much smaller group, a line manager came up to me and said, I've showed this framework to one of my colleagues, and they said, that's a load of rubbish, it's a load of HR speak, I'm having absolutely nothing to do with it. Richard, how would you handle that situation?
Well,
I'm sure it doesn't happen in Neath Job Centre.
I'm afraid it has happened a few times with a number of staff, to be honest. I think, first of all, a lot of the people who are saying it's a load of rubbish, the other big complaint about it is we haven't got time to actually go into it, is from people who actually haven't accessed and done the learning. So the way I would look at it is it's almost like carrot and stick, which is your style of management. I prefer to go with the carrot option first to explain how good it is. By going in civil service competency, the actual training part of it, the actual learning, the e-learning is broken down into small manageable chunks. You can do it at 5 minutes, leave it on the system, come back later on and do a 20-minute session, or just switch it off and return it the next day. So over a course of a week or a month, you should be having time to go in there and access things. Mm-hmm. The other part of it, of course, is it is an expected requirement for us to develop ourselves. It's linked with the standards of behaviour, our end-of-year marking system. So what we're actually going to do in our job centres, and I'm sure it will be done elsewhere, is in the one-to-one performance reviews, is review the personal development plans, which in real life means what have you done to improve yourself? It is up to staff to come to us and say, these are the development opportunities that we have actually done over the last month, 2 months, etc.
And we'll talk about development a bit more later on. Okay. But that, I think that Richard's answer to that, as a line manager, is to encourage that colleague to talk to other colleagues who are perhaps feeling more positive about it. My answer was a bit tougher than that to this individual. I said that, we've clearly set out expected standards of behaviours, both effective and ineffective. That includes, for example, contributing positively to team discussions. It includes showing energy and enthusiasm about the work of the department and the priorities of the department. We need to make it clear to colleagues that those are our expectations. And if you don't demonstrate those behaviours, that will have an impact on your performance mark. So part of this is about us encouraging line managers and individuals to look honestly at those behaviours and have honest conversations about them. Moving on to talk about recruitment and selection as an area. Of the many, in hundreds, in fact thousands of colleagues I've spoken to over the last year, the most positive aspect of one competency framework for people is the fact that they can get one set of examples together and use that to apply for multiple jobs if they want to move around across government. Without a doubt, people think that is a good idea. So let's have a very brief example from Richard here, who is a local character and indeed tried to train me earlier in a word of Welsh to say good afternoon, and I forgot it almost instantly, and that gentleman at the back tried to train me again, and again I've struggled to absorb it. It was good afternoon. Pwhant da?
Very close, prynawn da.
Prynawn da. So good afternoon to Welsh colleagues. So a bit of competence development needed there from me. So Richard, tell us, please, you're thinking about going for progression. Actually, before I do that, hands up colleagues who've been through selection or think they might be going through selection again in their career. What about people who'd like to go for a promotion or even a transfer? Many of us in the room, if not all of us, will need to use the competency framework to develop our examples, our competency evidence, something we will all have to do. So Richard, give us your best story.
Yes, Sue said this to me about half an hour ago before we met. We wanted to talk about your best competency, and I thought, I wasn't really planning that. But when I thought about it for 2 minutes, the one I'd actually cover at the moment is about changing and improving. It's an example that I'm sure we're all familiar with. What I've done, and this is a real story, it's not just for the day, I've actually completed the innovation learning, e-learning on civil service learning. I've done that because within our office, as it is with many of the departments, we've got to achieve less with more. And it's not always about improving the processes, it can be about improving the behaviours and thinking of the staff. So what I found through going through the innovation learning part was, what were the barriers to innovation? It listed things like, it could be a manager, they might not want to know about change. That could apply to me when I'm talking to my staff. It could be colleagues. How many times have we been in meetings where somebody has said, well, that's a daft suggestion. It could be myself being over-analytical about things that's actually prevented me from taking a germ of idea forward. All of that has helped me to facilitate meetings in my office where people are feeling more comfortable about what can we change, what can we challenge things, and not frightened of putting their ideas forward. I have some very small examples of what we've done, because this is at the start of all this journey. We had a problem with lean boards, people ideas about suggestions and concerns that we write in offices. In our job centre, we had one main lean board in our conference room that wasn't being used. Just because of this, we've now got small lean boards on each of the teams, and they are actually using it on everyday concerns. What I believe I have done is started to change the thinking of people, and a lot of it is from the work I've taken from civil service learning.
Thank you, Richard. I'm sure many of you will have heard of the STAR model for developing your evidence. Yeah? Hands up if you've heard of the STAR model, lots and lots of people. So that's situation, task, action, results. It's a recommended way of developing your evidence. Also the WHO model, what, how, and outcome. Now, listening to Richard's story, I think it links, and thinking about the situation, the context for that example. That's all about the work he is doing to lead the culture change in Neath Job Centre, to promote a pacier, innovative, results-oriented culture that doesn't focus always on process. It's really important when he's presenting his evidence that he ties it strongly to that big picture. Because all of us, in all of the work we do, there will always be a link back to reform, to efficiencies, to taxpayers' money, to job outcomes, to improving our communities. You have to tell that story in the first few lines. And then you go on to look at the detail, then really decide, of your best stories, which competency, which piece of do they most strongly link to? And that's when you start tailoring that story to draw in information from the indicators. Finishing off with an outcome. And I think, as we will all be aware, what gives outcomes the wow factor is numbers, it's figures. You know, what were employee engagement like, percentage levels like in Neath last year, Richard?
55%.
So we'll be looking at a story where you could show an improvement will absolutely, hit the nail on the head for people doing sifting and interviewing. What about your efficiency challenge? Were you under, did you have to create a reduction in resources over this year?
Yes, I mean, that's one of the big issues here is that we have to achieve more with less. We can look at all the processes, and I'm sure there will be some savings within that. But actually, I think we do need to change some behaviours in the offices. I'm not being critical of the staff in my job centre. It's an excellent job centre, and we produce excellent results. But as with the show of hands we did earlier on, a number of the people in my office will have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. So we are managing down at the moment, and they will need to change. They will need to think differently, work more as a team, not just be looking at what their job is and not worrying what everybody else is. So actually, all of the competencies and the learning fits in really well with helping to take people forward.
So just as a very short session about recruitment and selection, I think the main learning point or message perhaps is, don't wait for selection to hit you like a train. Don't wait for that perfect job to appear on civil service jobs, because developing 6 really good quality pieces of evidence where you've got figures, you've got qualitative information as well as quantitative, and it tells a story that really makes people think, I absolutely get it. That takes time. So you need to find the time to do that. I think now is a good moment to mention some of the resources that we have on civil service learning to support implementation of one framework, and particularly in performance management. We launched a number of tools on the 18th of February. That's just the front page of the Civil Service Competency Framework, sort of micro site that sits within civil service learning. Have people seen it? Yeah? Yeah, some rumblings of yes. If not, you find it from the home page of the Civil Service Learning portal. We've got case studies. I'll see if I can find this red dot. Got one about applying for a job, and in particular, we have a learning resource called Applying for a Job. Now, that learning resource describes how to use civil service jobs, and it also gives some examples to support people in thinking about getting their examples together. There's also going to be a new event that's currently under development by Civil Service Learning called Getting a New Job. That'll be a face-to-face course. Given where we are with a smaller, leaner civil service, there are a number of colleagues in redeployment pools, in career transition, so a bit more resource has been put into supporting that learning. Right. Before we move on to our last section, learning and development, Ian, anything you'd like to add from the Home Office perspective in terms of bringing the framework in for performance management and recruitment? Anything we haven't covered that you think would be useful for colleagues?
Yes. So as mentioned earlier, I'm relatively new to the civil service, but one of the experiences when we had it was so working in a centre, one is to slow down, breathe, just breathe, yeah, that's on the notes as well. One of the experiences I found was I was constantly getting questions, many of the same questions from different people. And a lot of them, the answers were already out there. They're available in civil service learning, through communications we'd already put out. But the thing I hadn't quite clicked onto straight away is that performance management and competencies and development is quite an emotive subject. It's about what people do all year, it's about livelihoods, it's about people's jobs, a lot of time what people put a lot of passion into. So the big issue we found to address was addressing this fear of the unknown. As I mentioned, many of the answers to the questions were available, but people were a little bit nervous to look for them or slightly unwilling. So I think our big point of learning was just addressing this fear issue with clear messaging, supporting line managers so they felt confident when their staff came to them to address this, So following on from that, what we got was a never-ending request for guidance. If there was one paragraph missing, people would want a whole extra 3 booklets and a presentation and a day workshop on it, even if it was already available with the same message. So what we found was, up to a point, we would direct people to guidance that already existed. And as mentioned before, when it came to specific roles and jobs, we would tend to ensure that there were people in the work area trained up to understand that, usually from HR, and they would help people within that work area shape their objectives and their what and their how and tailor them specifically. And the final point being, again, this clear messaging through leaders throughout the organisation, that really helped. And that's everyone. That's everyone from team leaders to line managers to right up to the SCS. That really helped us.
Thank you. Still a bit slower, I think. Moving on now to talk about using the framework to support the capability build to help people with their development plans. Got a development plan in place, folks? Show of hands. Less than half. So this is a great opportunity, isn't it, at Civil Service Live, to reflect upon what you can do for your development for the forthcoming year. And the final part of this presentation is about how the framework and how the civil service learning tools can support that. So I'd like to start with Ian. Ian, are you a member of a profession?
I am. I'm a member of the HR profession.
Let's see if we can keep that up. One of the angles to bear in mind as line managers and individuals is that as well as the generic competency framework, there are also 25 recognised cross-government professions. Ian's a member of HR. I'm sure Richard is a member of the biggest profession. Any ideas what? Operational delivery, absolutely. Operational delivery are here today. They're the biggest profession with 280,000 members. Anybody who has contact with the customers is generally belongs to the operational delivery profession. Now, all the 25 professions have given a line on professional development. Some professions have developed additional competencies. Procurement, for example, have done this to support the generic framework. Operational delivery have not done that, but they are recommending 7 of the 10, and they've built a professional development pathway underneath that. Now, back to Ian, as a member of the HR profession. Can you tell us a little bit about what's on your development plan for this year?
Yeah. So when I first joined, I had to go for an assessment centre to join, and that highlighted a couple of things in terms of strengths and weaknesses. One of the first ones being I wasn't very good at reading and writing and comprehension, which wasn't all that surprising because I'm dyslexic. But what I've learned from that is I have to make sure I get it to a functional level to make sure I can do my job and it's not letting me down. Making sure it's just not a weakness. It's never going to be my strength. I don't want to focus on jobs that are going to do that to me, but I've got to make sure it's functional at the right levels for that. Strengths, it said, were group meetings, and somewhat around talking and communicating. So I'm trying to build on that and slow down a little bit and keep practicing these sort of presentations. So part of my development is actually being here today and with lots of notes, and Sue giving me nudges to slow down a little bit. And that's my development. The other thing I've learned, which it wasn't written down and wasn't part of the assessment centre, it was learning to deal with office politics, learning to in a work environment. Because partly me talking quickly is probably because I'm generally very enthusiastic and quite energetic about things. But equally, that can come across as being overly direct. So I've perhaps been overly direct in the past, and learning from that, all about my development is developing emotional intelligence, as well as just slowing down my speaking and breathing. That's a tough one to remember, though. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ian. That's just a story from an individual. And one of the things to really reflect upon about development is think about what you're good at, reflect upon your strengths, and try and play to those. So everybody should have something in their development plan that aims to build on something they already do well. Anybody got that? Who's got something in their development plan that builds to a strength? One person. 2 people. Anybody want to come and tell us? It's not you. It's a bit difficult with the sound anyway, but it's absolutely, if we're thinking about being the best civil servant we can be, part of an exceptional civil service delivering the best for Britain, we absolutely have to play to what we're good at. None of us are going to be fantastic at everything. We will all have areas in which we excel. Make the most of that. Coach colleagues, be a mentor in that area. Do presentations in it, run an action learning set. Be known for that thing that you're fantastic at. So that's the first thing to think about. And find out what you're good at, get feedback from others, and do some work to develop that area before you then look at what your development areas are. Richard's now going to tell us a bit about the approach he took in Neath to promote development generally in his team. And just remind us the size of your team, Richard.
Well, we've got 48 staff associated with Neath Job Centre. And I'll pick up the story really from where Sue was left off. We'd had the telekit on civil service learning. We'd gone into the site. And to be honest, it's a massive site. There's so many offshoots to it. We needed to deliver something to the staff that they could understand and could take forward. So what we actually did at the whole office meeting, we went onto the screens and we worked our way through it. We worked our way through to the competencies and actually reflected on the good and the bad behaviours. We did go quickly on some of the learning that's associated with it at that session, but you've got to remember in a local job centre we only had 45 minutes to present quite a big thing. So we'd covered the competencies. We also followed this up then in monthly one-to-ones. We had included the competencies, some of the lines of the competencies in the steps to the achieve of individuals' objectives. So we covered the most effective behaviours, which just emphasised the fact it wasn't all about numbers. We needed people to behave in a certain way. Because some people were very good at getting their own targets, but actually weren't contributing to the whole office and team's performance. So they knew about the behaviours, they had them in the competencies. The next thing we did was actually get all my team to sign up to me as a line manager. I don't know if you've been into civil service learning, but line managers can actually select the members of their team, which sends them an email, which is a little bit like Facebook, which said, will you accept Richard Lawrence as your line manager? Thankfully, they all did. And in its own way, I felt quite good. They didn't have much choice, but they had acknowledged they'd accepted me. So we did all that. And that's really the processy part. Everybody understands what they've got to do. They're all signed up. And we're very good at the processes. It's actually where we're going from there. So what I've done with my team then is first of all ask them all to complete the self-assessment questionnaire on civil service learning. It is really easy. It takes about 10 minutes. It's a lot of simple questions. And by answering them honestly, civil service learning will actually identify e-learning and facilitated courses that are appropriate to the answers that the members of staff have supplied. So that already started to form a basis of the personal development plans. Still not all the staff were convinced though. They got this far. We were actually starting to handle the objections then about time. Was it worth it? The issues that you brought up at the start. We pushed ahead with it, and some staff actually entered into it. They actually covered some of the learning that they had done. I can remember what we actually did then was at our monthly office team meetings. sorry, I'm not about the whole office, it's my section meeting. I asked staff to come back with some of the learning that they'd done and just talk about the good and the bad points about it. It was a far stronger message hearing 2 or 3 of you staff saying, actually, I did this training and it was good. It was actually insightful. It was really useful for me and it was pertinent to my job. We're talking things about simple things like assertiveness training, to resilience training, where I think they said on Football AM it was bounce back ability. It's that sort of thing we're covering out there, and there was a lot of tools and techniques.
That's great, thank you.
I was just going to say the last thing I wanted to cover was the district has embraced it as well, because when you look at the facilitated events, you can think you'd have to travel for them. What the district has done is actually asked for the facilitators to come to our district, and we've run a number of face-to-face facilitated events for our teams. So we've done managing teams, feedback and communication, presentational skills. You've got to be careful of that, because I was on one 2 weeks ago in front of 10 people. Now I'm here, and it's a few hundred.
Thank you. Again, a very brief session about development planning. Of course, the message in here is to use the Civil Service Learning Portal, and Richard has presented that very well. There are a large number of resources available. Fantastic search facility, incredibly easy to use. Civil Service Learning are here today, and indeed are offering one-to-one advice clinic sessions if you'd like a bit of time to talk to somebody individually about your development plan. Also here are the operational delivery profession, and they can tell you more about the professional development offer. Another great team that are here today that can support development planning is Civil Service Local. Anybody spoken to them today? Yeah? They're doing all sorts of amazing things. Cross-government forum, they're doing development academies, discovery sessions, they're going into schools. You know, they're looking for people to come and work with them on a part-time basis, as well as to participate in what they're doing. Fantastic opportunity for development there. So they've been mobbed today, but I'm sure they'd like to be even more mobbed. Is there somebody from Civil Service Local here going, no, stop? I'm just going to finish off now. We'll have a little bit of time for questions. I'd just like to hear one thing from our 2 colleagues here. One thing they're going to do this year that will really deliver the framework or civil service reform. I want, wow, go in.
I'm going to speak slower. And within collaborating and partnering, what I'm going to do is effectively manage team dynamics when working across departmental boundaries. I hope that looked very natural reading, just to make sure I got it right. But effectively, what I want to make sure I do is manage my enthusiasm, communicate more concisely. Because as I mentioned, when I first joined, I perhaps was a little direct. So what I want to do is make sure when I see an opportunity for the team I'm working in, I'm able to help the team take that opportunity without being too pushing direct, managing the opportunities well, and speaking slowly. Breathe.
Thank you. Richard.
For me, it's taking responsibility for the quality of my own work and seeking opportunities for improvement through continuous learning.
Thank you. I did 2 things last year. One was the Civil Service Competency Framework. I haven't done anything else. That's been my job. And I was also a volunteer at the Olympic Games. I was at the Olympic and Paralympics. I was in the Olympic Stadium. I can't think of that time without the emotion coming to my mind. It was an incredible experience. But when I look at that quote from a really busy operational manager in HMRC, I'm even prouder to have been lucky enough to do a piece of work that has hit the desk of every single civil servant. And what civil service reform and the competency framework has given me back, it's to be able to say, I'm proud to be a civil servant. Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Or any comments? If anybody would like to share their story, I would love to hear that. I think we have some colleagues with the mic. There's a lady there. We only have a few minutes before we finish at 1.
Hi, my name's Jill Bacon from MOJ. My
is the civil service learning side. As a dyslexic, we're having real bad problems in our offices trying to be able to work with it. We don't think that the learning styles have ever been taken on board with it. And it was interesting to see that you'd actually set up your workshop with the Competency Framework and actually got all your staff to go through it. I don't think that's been done across the board. It certainly hasn't been done in our office. We've been sent an email with it attached on to look at the new performance criteria and decide on what our goals are going to be, but there's no training on it at all. And the other one is as learning and development. I'm actually a postgraduate person, and I've been in civil service now for 8 years and can't do any development because I've already got a degree. It's got nothing to do with customer service. I was a teacher. I taught post-16 education for 15 years, and I'm not allowed to develop because I've already got my degree. And I've got another colleague who's in exactly the same situation. We're not being allowed to develop. We've got no learning development at all.
Lots of things in that question. I think I would strongly recommend you take the opportunity to have a one-to-one session in the Learning Advice Clinic. There are opportunities of development, as I mentioned earlier, Civil Service Local being a great one. Have that one-to-one conversation. May also be useful to have a chat to Ian as a dyslexic colleague. How's he got around it? But the main thing that's come from me, we've just evaluated the framework. I've had comments from over 7,000 colleagues. And one of the real key insights is people need time to have a conversation about this. They need to really work that through with their manager and with their business partner. So there isn't any formal training, but certainly the aim is that people have the opportunity to have those conversations. And in many, many places, that is happening, as evidenced by Richard. Thank you, Jill. And we will be around, just around the civil service learning area, just there, all three of us. Please do come and talk to us. As I say, I need to stick to time. I think I've got perhaps one more question. Anybody? That lady there.
Hello, my name's Heather McLeod. I'm an HR business partner for NOMS. I got very excited when I went to a session delivering the new competency framework within the civil service, and was so enthusiastic because I just couldn't believe it was all linked up. Went back to work to set expectations for senior managers and what was coming and how excited I was about it, only to find that NOMS has its own 5 behaviour competences that are added to the civil service competencies. And it's not linked, so I was very disappointed. Is it ever going to be linked?
That's a departmental specific question, and I'm well aware of the work that NOMS have done. There was a feeling that for prison officers, this was the framework just didn't sufficiently cover the things that were really important to them. In the same way that some of the professions have got additional competencies, that's the choice the department made. However, again, I've had some feedback about that from colleagues like yourself who say that the linkages are not clear. And indeed, I met the lead for MOJ at Olympia yesterday, and I had this exact conversation with her, and I will be dropping MOJ a line about this issue. So I think a bit more work needs to be done to align that. But you know, there were good, bringing in one standard across government, it takes time, and certainly for some colleagues in NOMS, it was just a bit too much. They needed to see there's some departmental specific stuff there. We can catch up about that separately as well. We've run out of time. As I say, it's important that we all stick to our time. Really appreciate you coming and giving us this time. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.